get started, please clone the GitHub repository from the link in the description. Let's start off by creating our chat feature. The first part that we're gonna work on is the repository. Create a file for chat repository, and this is where we define all our Firebase related methods. Create chat repository as an immutable class. The first method that we need to define here is create chat room. So when two users chat, we will create a chat room for them to store their messages and keep track of all the details for their chat. This method requires us of a user ID. And we also apply try and catch for error handling. The logic is that if we fail to create a chat room, we would return the error message. Otherwise, we would return chat room ID. The first thing that we need to do is to get a reference for our chat rooms collection. Then we need to get the list of chat room members, and it is really important to sort them. Let's define my UID above. And let's now sort the list and make sure to use 2 dots instead of 1. So the sorted members returns the list and not the sorting function. Now is the time to get our existing chat rooms to see if there is a chat room between two users already. For that, we use our chat room reference and set a condition to only get those chat rooms that exactly has the list of members. So if existing chat rooms are not empty, we return its ID, as we are sure there is only one chat room. Otherwise, we begin to construct a new chat room. So we create the chat room ID, and in case you don't know, we use UUID package for that. Next, let's create a model for our chat rooms. For that, I'm gonna create a model folder inside which I'll put my chat room model. This chat room is gonna be an immutable class inside which we have 5 fields. We have a chat room ID, a last message timestamp, a list of members that's gonna be only 2 because we usually have chat between 2 persons, and created that to say when our chat room has been created. We also have toMap and fromMap methods. Inside these methods, instead of using normal strings, I have used constant variables. All of these constants are defined inside a file called Firebase field names. To access these files, you can clone the GitHub repository or simply copy and paste. Now back to chat repository. Let's create a chat room instance. We already have our chat room ID. Last message is gonna be empty, and last message timestamp is set to datetime.now. The list of members are gonna be equal to sorted members, and created that is always gonna be datetime.now. But when you see the same code twice, there's always an opportunity for refactoring. So I'm gonna put current time inside a now variable and use it in both places. Beautiful. Now all that remains is to post our chat room to Firestore using set method. And what this method does is to create a new document in your collection if it doesn't exist. Otherwise, it will replace your document data with the new one. Also, make sure to convert your chat room object to map using toMap method. And lastly, we would return the chat room ID. So I guess it was all we needed to do for this method. Let's also create a method for sending text messages. This method takes 3 parameters: a message, chat room ID, and receiver ID. We apply error handling using try and catch, and in case we have an error, we just return it. But if we don't, I'm just gonna return null. So let's create our message ID first. We also need to store current time inside a now variable. Now let's create a model for our message, and again I'll copy and paste all the code. Our message takes several properties. First, we have a message that can be our text or the link for the video or image that we have sent. We also have a message ID, sender ID, receiver ID, message timestamp, a bool to check if message has been seen, and also a message type to check whether this is a text message, image, or a video. And per usual, we have toMap and fromMap methods. Back to chat repository, let's create a message instance. We already have provided message and message ID. And for the sender ID, I'll just put my UID. We have the receiver ID, timestamp is equal to now, send property is false, and message type is set to text. But then I noticed that I have defined my method outside the chat repository class, so let's move it in. Next, we need to get a reference to the chat room that we want to send our message to. Inside the chat room, create a subcollection called messages. Create a document with the message ID. and then save the message inside the document. Now we also need to update the last message. Again, we need to use chatroom reference. Use the update property to only update certain fields. Other fields are gonna stay unchanged. Here we only need to update last message and last message timestamp. So that's all for sending a message. Let's also explore how to send a media message that contains either an image or a video. And because those two methods are very similar, I'm just gonna copy and paste. Inside the properties, instead of a message, we need to take a file and make sure to import it from .io. We also need to provide the message type. And we also need to save our media to some storage. I will use Firebase storage for this purpose. And let's not forget to rename this method to send file message. For using Firebase storage, we need to create a reference. For that purpose, let's get an instance of Firebase storage at the top. Use the ref property to create a folder inside Firebase storage. Then specify a child to create a subdirectory, in this case, name of your file. This structure is very similar to Firestore, in which you had a collection and then a document inside that collection. The ref property here indicates the root directory of our storage, but giving it a parameter of message type, we create a folder with the name of that's either an image or a video. Then we specify a child, and as we're inside the folder, the child name indicates the name of our file. Lastly, get the download URL out of the task snapshot and use that as our message content. And instead of text, let's change our message type to be equal to message type parameter. And just like previous method, we get a chatroom reference and save our message inside that. The only difference here is that we update our last message and indicate we have sent an image or a video. I also noticed that we're sending raw date times to Firebase, so let's change them to milliseconds since epoch in both of the places. The last method we need to define here is send message. This method requires a chatroom ID as well as a message ID. Inside this method, if you open chatroom's collection, find that specific chatroom by chatroom ID, go to messages subcollection, find the message using message ID, and then set the message send property to true. And now for handling the errors, put everything inside a try and catch, then make a return type a feature of nullable type string. Here we go. So this was all about chat repository. In the next section, we will start working on with our providers. Now that we are done creating our repository, let's also define our providers. For that, I'm going to create a folder for providers, and the first provider that I'm going to code is the chat provider. This is the most basic provider, and its only job is to return an instance of chat repository. So we can access it anywhere in our code. The next provider that we define is called get all chats provider, that is responsible for getting all the chat rooms that we are part of. This one is going to be an stream provider, so we get the data in real time. So if someone sends us a message, their name should appear in the list of chats. Also, the last message has to be updated in real time. So let's define a stream provider. For that, we need to create a stream controller. Let's specify a type for this provider that is iterable of chat rooms. I'm also going to make it auto dispose. And inside the dispose method, let's close the controller and cancel our subscription to Firestore. At the end of the method, we also need to return controller.stream, and hence our controller should be of the same type as our provider. Now let's create our subscription to Firebase. First, let's try to go to chatrooms collection, get only those documents where their member field contains my UID. So let's define my UID above. We also need to order our chats based on last message timestamp. So the chats with the most recent messages appear on the top, just like all the famous messenger apps. So now let's get our snapshots and listen to them. This method gives me a snapshot. So for getting list of chats, we need to go to snapshot.docs and map each document that is of type map. Then we need to turn each item into a chat room using fromMap method and return them. This gives us a list of chat rooms. So now we can add all our items to the controller to be returned as a stream. So this was all we actually had to do to get our chat rooms. Next, let's explore how we can get our messages for each chat room, and because these two are very similar, I'm gonna copy this code and use it for getting the messages. So let's create a file called get all messages provider, and I'm gonna paste all the codes I have copied just now. First, change name of the provider to get all messages provider, and because we get all the messages for a specific chat room, we need to provide the chat room ID. So let's make our provider a family provider. This way we can have parameters. So now we have two data types here. First is for the return type, and the second one is for the input parameter type. So type string as chat room ID is a string. You also need to specify name of your parameter after the ref. Let's also make sure that we get a list of messages rather than chat rooms. Here, instead of getting all the chat rooms, we get one chat room with the chat room ID provided. Then we need to go to messages subcollection, and just like before, we get all the snapshots and listen to them. Now we just need to change all the chats to messages and make sure to map our snapshot data to messages instead of chat rooms. And lastly, add our messages to the controller. Now let's refactor our codes and also organize imports. So it was all we actually needed to do with providers. In the next section, we will work on the UI and functionalities of our app. So now that we're building the UI, let me bring the emulator to the site. I'll also run the app. First of all, I want to enable my users to create a chat room. And I want a chat room to be created as soon as you press send message button. So let's create this button in profile screen, and I'm gonna give it a transparent background. Also, let's put some space between these two buttons. When you click on the button, you have to navigate to chat screen. So let's create chat screen inside presentation screens. Inside chat screen, you have to return a feature builder, and the feature is create chat room method to create a chat room as soon as we enter the chat screen. And as you can see, this method requires us a user ID. So let's get it as a parameter above. While the app is loading the data, let's show a circular progress indicator. Let's also define a chat room ID variable at the top. And when the data is loaded, we fill our chat room ID with the snapshot data and then return an scaffold. Let's define a route name for chat screen. And inside the routes, I define a route for chat screen. So first we change our route, get user ID, and then return chat screen. Inside the profile screen, we need to pass the user ID when navigating to chat screen. So now if we click on send message, it takes us to chat screen and also creates a chat room in Firestore, as you can see here. Next, let's display list of chats, and for that I'm gonna create chats screen. The first I want to do is to define routes for this screen, so let's do that. Let's also add the routes to the chat screen. Now hot restart the app to apply the changes. I want to be able to go to chat screen by clicking on the messenger icon. To make it clickable, wrap it with gesture detector and add a navigator. Now click on the messenger icon to open chat screen. Replace the container with the scaffold. Now we can see a white background. To have an idea of how chat screen should look like, I will open the final project. This is how the UI for chat screen look like. You can click on this icon to add the story, and this one to open your profile screen. I'm gonna start the UI by giving a white background color to scaffold. Inside body, add the save area and then use padding. I'll use default padding. Inside padding, add a single child scroll view to avoid overflow errors on smaller screens. We put everything inside a column. The first widget we need to build is the app bar. I'm gonna create a method widget for it. Define it outside the build method. Start by returning a row. The first element is my profile pic that displays your profile picture. Let's create a separate widget for that. Hence, we need to create it inside a new folder called widgets. Make sure it's a consumer widget and do the imports. First, we need to get the current user's info by get user info provider. Then we use our provider's when property to handle error and loading cases. In the data case, return a circle avatar with a radius of 40 and set the background image to user.profilepic URL. Now return to chat screen and import my profile pic. Then we put a size box with a height of 5. And then we put the chat text and give it some style to make it look bigger. Let's open up our real app, and as you can see, the profile pic looks pretty big. I'm gonna change the radius to 30. Looks perfect. Now we need to add our add story button and push it all the way to the right. For that, let's use a spacer, and what it basically does is to take all the space and push all items to other sides. Use a round icon button as the story button, but as per design, this button doesn't have an onPressed. For that, I'm modifying the button and define my onPressed using a void callback and make sure it is nullable. Then let's wrap our padding with an inkwell and pass our onPressed handler to onTap property. Now inside our onPressed property, let's navigate to create the story screen. But because we're outside the build method, we don't access to the context. So we can either wrap our widget with a builder or use a stateful widget or use an stateful widget. To save time, I'm gonna first convert my widget to a stateless widget, then use Dart helper to make it stateful. Lastly, let's make it consumer by adding consumer keyword before any state you see that are actually 3. Now let's save our work and do a hard restart. And now we can add a story from chat screen. You can customize it the way you want, but I'm gonna leave it as it is. Now it's time to build the search widget. For that, give 20 pixels of vertical space and define it below. I'll just copy and paste the entire widget, and this widget requires as a controller, but I don't need it now, so I will just get rid of it and make it constant. But we've got an error here, and Dart asks us to remove curly braces in the parameter list. Search widget is pretty simple, so I'm not gonna explain it. Let's put a size box with a height of 20 after it. Then let's define chats list, that is the most important component here. Make sure to wrap it with an expanded to take up the entire remaining space. Let's define it as a separate widget. Use a consumer widget and import required dependencies. Get the list of chats inside the build method using the app provider we defined earlier. Return the chats instead of the container and take care of loading and error states. Return a list view for displaying the list of chats. Item count is going to be chats.length, and inside the item builder, get the current chat from the list of chats. Also get user ID of the other person from the list of members in the chat. The way it works is that there are 2 users in the list of members, and you get the user ID that's not yours, so it's gonna be the next person. For that, you also need to define my UID inside the build method. Now let's create chat tile inside the widgets, and I'm just gonna copy and paste all the codes for that. So let's also fix the imports. Inside the chat tile, first we get user info using get user info by ID provider, and for the UI, we have a padding of 8 from all sides. There is also an inkwell, and if we click on it, we navigate to chat screen and pass user ID as an argument. Inside the row, we return a circle avatar for profile pic and also the name. We then return last message and last message timestamp under it. So this is all about UI. Inside chats list, just return chat tile and pass all the required properties. Now that is complete, let's go to chats screen and import it. Let's also wrap it with expanded to make sure it takes up the entire screen. But it looks like wrapping with expanded causes a UI error, so I would instead wrap it with a size box. When we click on the chat, we want to navigate to chat screen. We also need to pass a user ID, but inside the routes, we get our user ID as a string and not as a map. So let's modify it. Now if we hard restart the app, we see that we can open a chat with the user. In the next part, we will explore how we can send a message. Let's start designing our chat screen. But before starting, let's take a look at the final design to have an idea of what we are building. So this is how the final product looks like. To start, let's open up chat screen. Inside the scaffold, give a background color of white and also define a title. Inside the leading, put an icon button that is iOS back button with the color of messenger blue that we have defined inside our app colors. And inside the onPress, use a navigator.pop to pop out of the screen. Now, set the title spacing to 0, and inside title, define a widget called chat user info that requires a user ID. I'm gonna build that widget inside the widgets folder. It's gonna be a consumer widget. Inside the build method, we need to get info of our user through user ID. So let's define user ID as a parameter. Now that we have our user info, return user info dot when and take care of loading and error cases. This time I'm gonna copy and paste the codes for them. But for the data case, let's return a row. Inside the row, the first child is gonna be a circle avatar for the profile picture. Now put a size box with a weight of 10. After that, place a column for the name. Set the cross-axis alignment to start. The first child is the user's name. Give some styles and then put a messenger text at the bottom. It also needs some styling. Now let's go and import it inside the app bar. I'm gonna go to actual app and hard restart. And it looks as expected. Now we have to start working on the messages part. Start by defining a body and put a column inside. Define the messages list wrapped with an expanded widget. Put a divider and then define message input. I'll comment messages list for the moment. So let's create build messages input, and I'm gonna copy paste the code to save time. This is actually a huge widget. I'll explain important parts. First, do all the imports, and inside the pic image, get rid of the image source and also go inside the pic video and do the same thing. Next, we need to define a message controller for our text field. Let's define one and make sure it is initialized in the init state and also disposed. Now let's hard restart the app, and now our message input UI is showing correctly. If you press on the image button, it's gonna open the gallery, and if you press the video button, it's gonna open up videos. We also have a text field for sending a message. If you press this button, it's gonna send the message. Now let's come to the code. Inside the onPress, we use chat provider to send a text message, and as soon as the message is sent, we clear the text field. Now let's see the code for sending a video. Inside the onPress, we first pick the video using the video picker. If the video is null, we stop the code execution. Otherwise, we send a file message and pass our video to that. Also make sure that the message type is set to video. And we do the exact same thing for sending an image, except that we use image picker and message type will be image. Now we need to define our messages list. I prefer to create it in a separate file. Again, I'm gonna use a consumer widget for that. As always, the first thing we need to do is getting our data, that is in this case our messages. But to get the messages, we need the chatroom ID. So let's get it as an argument. We also need to get my UID to specify who the message belongs to. To get actual messages, return messages list.when to handle error and loading. I'm sure you're pretty familiar with it at this stage. Now return a list view.builder for displaying the messages. Inside the item count, return messages.length. Inside the item builder, first store the message in a variable. Then define a variable called isMyMessage to check if this message belongs to me by checking the sender ID. And if that is my message, I will just return send message. Otherwise, return a received message. We need to create both of those widgets. First, define send message inside the widgets folder. I'm gonna copy and paste the code for it and make sure to fix imports. Let's also define received messages, and again I'm gonna copy and paste the code for it. As you may have noticed, there is a widget that is used inside both of them, and that widget is message content. The job of message content is to display the correct message type, so it determines if the message should display a simple text, an image, or a video. I'll create the message content inside the widgets folder. I'll again copy and paste the code, and we do the imports. Then we need to change the message type to file type. Let's also organize our imports. The logic of this widget is that if message type is a text, it will just return a simple text. Otherwise, it will return post image video view. Post image video in itself checks for the file type. If the file type is an image, it returns a network image. Otherwise, it will return a network video view. This is a widget we have defined earlier, and this widget is responsible for creating a playable video. Now let's import message contents inside send message. Let's also import it inside the receive message, and instead of using run profile pic, let's use run profile tile that we have defined earlier, and it asks us for a URL instead of user ID. Also remove the extra imports to get rid of the error. Now save the file and exit. Inside the messages list, make sure to import both send and receive messages and hard restart the app. Let's test the app by sending a message. It works. But you notice if you send many messages, the oldest message appears at the bottom. But if you want the latest message to appear there, for that, go inside Messages List View and set the reverse property to true. Save the file and it works perfectly. The next feature that we're going to be working on is ability to mark messages as seen. So when the other user sees the message, it has to be double ticked. Inside the list view.builder, we mark messages as seen using chat provider's seen message method, but only if they do not belong to us. That way we cannot see our own messages. The way it works is that list view builder only builds widgets that are in the viewport. So when the other user scrolls to that message, it is being built and hence the code is getting executed. So now let's test the app to see if all the features are working correctly. Now that the chat feature is working correctly, let's work on chat rooms. You might notice that the list of chats are not appearing, and it is because we need to create indices for them. Open up your terminal and you might find a message like this. Click on the link and it will take you to Firebase. Log in with the account using which you created your Firebase project, and a dialog appears asking you to create an index. Just click create and wait for your index to be created. Another issue that you need to fix is that when you navigate to a profile screen, make sure to pass your user ID inside a map like this. Now let's test our app. I have opened two different accounts on two different phones. Notice that the chat room is created when I press send message button, but the last message of the chat room is empty. Notice how the last message changes when I send a new message. When I send one more message, I notice that the last message appears at the top. That is not the expected behavior. So let's go to repository and sort messages by timestamp and make sure it is descending. Let's hot restart the app, and as you see now, the issue is resolved. So let's test the app by sending some more messages, images, and also videos. So this was all about Flutter Chat tutorial. I hope you liked it. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and hit the like button. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.